Okay, everyone, this is Don Wedding, and we are in Predict 498, and this is the winter quarter of 2018, and this is Team 10, and this is their final oral report, and their topic is on NHL expansion teams. So unless anyone has any questions, I'm going to just kick it right off to the Team 10 NFL or NHL expansion. So good luck, everyone, and have fun. That's your cue to start.
Thanks. Thanks, Don. We appreciate it. So first off, thanks for having us here today. We're looking forward to discussing potential NHL expansion with you and our modeling approach to it and what our final conclusions are. Scott, if you'll go to the next slide. We wanted to start with a quick introduction, just to get to know the team, each of our roles, and how we contribute to the project. I'll hand off to Katie, and we'll just go down the introductions from there.
Sure. So my name's Katie O'Melia. I was the project lead on this engagement. In the real world, I'm a director of analytics for a sports publisher in New York called Bleacher Report. And throughout the engagement, I managed the client relationship, built timelines to keep us on track, and led the learnings and recommendations portion. And I will kick it over to Christy now.
Thanks, Katie. So this is Christy Foster, and I serve the role of the data science lead. In the real world, I work at a property assessment company in the data analytics and quality assurance group. On this engagement, I primarily contributed to developing, testing, and interpreting the model results.
Okay, now this is Scott Lavick. I served as the solution architect on the project. My real job is as a manager in the analytics and insights division at a marketing agency called Spark Foundry here in Chicago. For the project, I did some of the exploratory data analysis. I also worked on the dashboard and the mobile app. And that's it. And back to Brian.
Yep. Thanks, Scott. So in real life, I work for a consulting firm based out of Chicago. I work within our strategy group, in particular, our analytics-based solutions, anything ranging from patient analytics all the way to throughput as well, which is very relative. For this project, I served as a utility player, basically was a jack of all trades, helped with analyses, reviewed and edited documents, and promoted my hometown any chance I could. Doing anything an intern wants to do to hopefully get a job with Apatia Consulting after all this. Next slide, Scott. So in terms of the executive summary, this is sort of the agenda that we're going to follow through today. First, we want to overview the original problem. At the start of the engagement, we received an RFP from the NHL. The goal here was to explore a potential expansion as well as any team relocations. This was driven by the recent growth in the NHL, specifically since 2010. It's been driven by increased media coverage and ice hockey participation. Both have gone up by about 13 and 9% respectively. In 2013, the NHL signed a 12-year, $5.2 billion media agreement with Rogers Communications. Then in 2015, they signed a deal with IMG to expand their coverage in the United Kingdom. Around that same time, the NHL also signed with Eurovision, which expanded their operations in Russia. And also along that same time period, they made another aggressive move in signing with the Modern Times Group, which was a 5-year partnership for online NHL viewing in most of the Nordic countries. We want to keep this momentum going. We know that the NHL currently has 31 teams. Profitability and numbers have gone up, and we want to see if it's more profitable to expand into other cities. And if we do determine it is, what cities those might be. Just within the US alone, we've actually seen hockey participation obviously go up 9%, but collegiately, this is kind of the first money-making vehicle that's taken advantage of it. For example, up until 2013, one of the main conferences in hockey was called the CCHA. This was a mix of Miami of Ohio, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Alaska, Michigan, and Boston College, some of the more prominent hockey programs that actually moved out of their respective conferences to form essentially one giant dominant conference. But in 2013, they disbanded and essentially went to their real respective college conferences as a way to increase hockey coverage in college and just to expand their viewing range. And we feel that based on this sort of momentum, the same opportunity would probably rest with the NHL. So that's kind of the brief overview of why we're doing this. Following that, we will move into the analysis, which will be covered more in depth by Christy and Scott. They're going to talk about their methods for exploratory data analysis, data transformation, and their modeling approach. From that, we'll have an in-depth review of some of our top models and their outputs and their interpretations. But as we mentioned, the original RFP was to focus on two key areas, potential expansion and then which cities. But during the course of our engagement, we see that the NHL has approved Seattle as a potential choice for an expansion team. So to append our work, we wanted to actually use some data to verify whether this would be the right move for the NHL. And assuming it is, because we feel the NHL does make decisions in its best interest, we wanted to look at other cities that would be suited for expansion in addition to Seattle. Once we reach those conclusions, we'll also then decide if any current NHL teams have to be relocated. This is a topic that the NHL has visited in the past, and that we'll cover in the next few slides with a background and brief history of where the NHL has moved. If you don't mind moving to the next slide, Scott, and starting the expansion. Thank you. Throughout this expansion video, normally there's a little sound to it. I'm not sure if you're receiving it, but it starts with the narrative of the original six, which is, the famous teams of the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Chicago Blackhawks, the Boston Bruins, and then it shows how the NHL has expanded over time. Predominantly, we see a large focus in the Canadian region, obviously moving to the Midwest and then moving westward.
As we watch this, I'm curious, did you guys create this video yourself?
We did not, but we do have the citation on the slide should you choose to go back and revisit it and hear a more pleasant narrative than my voice.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, no problem.
I guess I can kind of unmute it and you can hear the sound through my computer that way. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Or unmute myself anyway, but it's not ideal.
And as you can see, there's been quite a bit of expansion since the original 6. Most of the teams throughout all these expansions are located more on the East Coast. Obviously, the most prominent expansion that comes to mind at the moment is with the Las Vegas Golden Knights, who have had some pretty good success in their first year this year. Most notably, they are the only expansion team in the United States, I believe, since about 1960 that has a guaranteed winning record. So definitely has increased viewership and intrigue in the league, and we're hoping throughout this project we could see a similar result. Moving into the analysis, I'll hand it over to Scott.
Okay. Hello. Oops, sorry. So just to get kind of more in the nitty-gritty of the actual project, we started with the initial exploratory data analysis. Our initial data set had 65 metro areas, 15 in Canada and 50 in the US. We pulled it together from a variety of data sources and includes demographic information like population growth, and that kind of thing. We also have team statistics, the number of years in the NHL, the home attendance, the points percentage, which points is, for those not familiar with hockey, it's kind of it's what teams can earn whenever they get a win or a tie. So that's how we created that variable. We also looked at overall NHL fandom, the percentage of NHL fans within a given metropolitan area, the number of hockey participants. There are currently 31 NHL teams that are in 28 metropolitan areas. And so then we added in the additional metropolitan areas based on what we thought would be the most likely to host a hockey team. And the way we selected the variables, it was kind of similar to a couple of other models that we found for expansion from the MLB and NFL. So we kind of focused on the same types of variables from there. Sorry, my slide isn't going forward. There we go. Okay. So in the initial EDA, we did a correlation analysis between some of the variables. There was a very high correlation between population, Fortune 500 companies, and total number of team franchises, which the various teams would be, NHL, MLB, NFL, NBA, and the Major League Soccer Association. So there was a high correlation between population, Fortune 500, and the total franchises, which seems logical. More people would mean more big companies, more fans, and such. There was no major correlation with income, which we were a little surprised at, but so that we kind of removed that from the modeling. Raleigh is the only metropolitan area that currently has an NHL team that does not have any other professional teams. That was actually pretty unusual because almost half of the NHL cities that have an NHL team have at least 3 other professional teams. Moving on to the actual data manipulation, data transformations. We had to do quite a bit to get the data set ready for modeling. So we started with data reduction. We removed some of the descriptive variables, such as insignificant variables. One would be the number of NHL teams that a metropolitan area has. Obviously, that can't really be used in a model when we're looking at cities that don't currently have an NHL team. We also removed some of the things like city, state, that kind of thing. Then we looked at missing data. There was a number of missing observations. So, for example, NHL fan percentage. This is the percentage of fans within a metro area that are NHL fans. We're missing that from a number of areas. So we created a decision tree to impute the missing values. So we found if the metro area was in Canada, the NHL fan percentage would be 54.89%. If it was in the US and the number of hockey participants was less than about 31,000, the percentage was 5.75. And if it was in the US and the number of hockey participants was greater than about 31,000, it was 18.6%. We also kind of looked at some of the related variables. Some of them were very closely related. Such we created a variable to combine total number of major league franchises within a given metro area, but obviously that would be closely related to our other variables that just show the number of MLB teams, NFL teams, and so on. So in some of the models, we would only use one of those closely related variables. far as normalizing some of the data we did that with the Fortune 500 category. So that was the number of Fortune 500 companies within a given metropolitan area. So we had to normalize that. We turned Fortune 500 into a set of dummy variables for each level. And since some of those had too few observations, we ended up combining the categories, and we created a Fortune 500 of greater than or equal to 4 and a Fortune 500 greater than or equal to 3 for that aspect of it. And then there was also just the general data transformations that we had to do, log and cube, to kind of get some of the variables to follow more of a normal distribution. And then finally, we looked at team performance. So this is what I'd mentioned earlier. It was the points percentage. So it was the percent of max points possible, which points being the points that a team can earn for winning or tying. So we obviously have this for current teams, but obviously that wouldn't exist for potential NHL expansion areas. So the idea is that a winning team will likely have, so for our modeling purposes, the idea is that a winning team would likely have a better attendance and vice versa. A losing team would likely have lower attendance. So as far as helping us predict attendance throughout the teams, we had to add in this points percentage for the cities that didn't have a team. So we set a level for the non-NHL cities, and we looked at the previous 5 expansion teams plus the most recent team in Vegas, and we ended up assuming a points percentage of 0.55, and that would currently be about 19th in the league. If we'd gone higher than that, it would have been 0.7 would have been about 2nd in the league, and 0.45 would have been about 26th in the league. So we decided 0.55 would have been a realistic number for a new expansion team. And I think that kind of covers most of the EDA and the data transformations. I'm going to hand it on over to Christy, and she'll get into more of the modeling aspect.
Thanks, Scott. So I'm going to talk about our modeling approach during this project. We considered 3 different types of models. The primary initial one that we considered was a binary classification model. So this was a model where we looked at the probability of a city having an NHL team. Following that, we created 2 regression models, one looking at revenue and the other one looking at attendance for a future NHL team. All 3 models use city attributes and NHL fandom, as Scott was just describing. Revenue and attendance models additionally added team statistics such as years in NHL and points percent, which Scott was also just describing. Next slide, please, Scott. So for the first model, we were looking at NHL team likelihood. For this model, we included cities with and without NHL teams in the data set. We included a training data set and a separate test data set. And we looked at many different types of models. So we looked at 11 different types of models in total, things such as generalized linear models and some regularized linear models in order to consider the polarity that was existing between variables. We also looked at several different tree models, as well as some others such as support vector machines and neural networks. Next slide, please. So for our NHL team likelihood, our best model was a GLM model, and you can see the list of variables that were selected for this on the slide. So this model was selected partially because it had one of the best accuracy rates on the test data set, but also because it's an interpretable model. You can easily explain what's happening with a formula, and that makes it a little bit more tangible for the client to pick up on. So of this model, population was found to be the most influential variable. Following that, we found that metropolitan areas with 2 Formula 500 or Fortune 500 companies was also important to the model, as well as the distance to the nearest NHL team, population growth, percentage of NHL fans, latitude of the city, and the number of hockey participants. So next slide, please, Scott. Thank you. So after we looked at the probability of whether a team would support or a city would support an NHL team, we added in a model for revenue to predict what the possible revenue would be of this new team. So for this model, we looked at linear regression models. Again, because we had a lot of related variables, we considered different modeling techniques that would account for these related variables. So we looked at best subset, linear regression, ridge regression, lasso, and then we took the best subset and added in a few additional variables that still did not increase the multicollinearity of our model. So for each of these models, we again trained on one data set of only NHL cities and tested on a holdout of, again, just the NHL cities. Moving on to the next slide, please. So when we did this analysis, the best model for revenue was found to be a best subset plus some additional variables. And you can see, again, the list of variables that were selected there. So this model, again, it's interpretable. You result in a formula that is easily to understand. It also resulted in the best test error rate on our holdout. So as Scott mentioned, in order to apply this model that was built on just NHL cities, we had to use, or we included two variables that were based on NHL team performance, years in NHL and points percentage. For all of those cities that didn't have an NHL team, we used the same variable. So relative to other cities with no NHL team, these variables don't impact the results. Where these variables come into play is when we're comparing the cities that currently have no NHL team to the cities that do have NHL teams. And as Scott mentioned, we used some analysis in order to determine which values we should use for those. In our model results, both of these variables were found to have the biggest impact on a team's revenue. After these variables, we also found that the total number of other professional franchises was very important. Similarly, the latitude of the city, the number of participants in hockey were also very important on the team's revenue, but these were only about 20% of the impact as the number of years in the NHL. Following these ones, population growth also was very important to the model's revenue. However, we found that this had a negative coefficient. So that intuitively didn't make too much sense. But when we looked into it a little bit further, we speculated that because the population growth variable was determined to be the population growth in the decade preceding the NHL formation, the time lag between the population growth used in the model and the current last year's revenue was likely to be giving this negative coefficient. So we didn't see that as a big issue in our models. Moving on, please, Scott.
Did you leave that variable in, or did you take it out after you saw the negative coefficient?
We did still leave it in.
Okay.
So the third model that we performed was an attendance model, very similar to our NHL revenue model. Again, it was built on NHL cities or cities with NHL teams, and then it was applied to cities without NHL teams. So similarly, because of the related variables, we looked at 4 different types of linear regression models that consider multicollinearity. And moving on to the next slide, please. So in this case, we found that a lasso model performed the best. And again, because it does perform feature selection, it selected the following variables that are provided on this slide. Similar to the revenue model, we found years in NHL and points percent are very important in predicting the attendance. And following that, but significantly less important to the model, we see that the number of NFL teams or CFL teams were also important, and following that, the latitude of the city. So in all of these models, we see that, or in these revenue and attendance models, we see that years in NHL and points percent are all very important to the attendance and revenue. And that gives us some weight to go forward to the NHL that's to suggest that the structure of the NHL teams being created is relevant to how well they're going to perform. And I'm going to carry it on to Katie next.
Thanks, Christy. So moving into the learnings and recommendations portion, we can go into the next slide as we kind of talk through what we found from these models and how we interpreted them. So as Christy mentioned, we originally just started with the initial classification model. So the point of the classification model was to determine whether or not, based on these city attributes that we had selected from past similar models from other leagues and specific variables that we thought would be relevant to an NHL model, we found that we had some interesting results that didn't necessarily jive with a recommendation to the NHL. So for an example, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia were actually predicted as having a less than 50% chance of having an NHL team in our model. So if you think about that, there is absolutely no way that we're going to go back to the NHL and tell them that two of their most successful franchises, two of the franchises that are in the top 10 revenue generation wise, should not actually have an NHL team. So in noticing that and in interpreting that first model, we realized that we needed to add a second and a third layer to our analysis that accounted for real life variables or portions of what make up an NHL team and what make that team successful. So that's where we added in the attendance and the revenue models. So in terms of evaluating expansion and relocation based on the combination of those three models, that's exactly what we did. We wanted to take a holistic approach and look at what are the cities in the expansion standpoint, what are the cities that are at the top 10 or in the top of every single one of these models, because we want to make sure that if we are recommending a city to the NHL, we want to make sure that it's a city that hits on all of those 3 points, and that is this a city that's going to be receptive to an NHL team? Is this a city that's actually going to attend games? And then from there, is this city actually going to produce a positively revenue generating franchise, which really at the end of the day is what the NHL is looking to maximize. So in doing so, we actually found some interesting results. So first we looked at only the cities that did not currently have an NHL team when looking at the expansion in the expansion question. So what we found was when looking at which cities ranked in the top 10 for each model, Seattle was the only city that fit the bill. So on the one hand, we did confirm that Seattle was a great choice for the next relocation or expansion team, but we also wanted to expand this to identify any other possible cities that could be open for expansion. So in doing so, we expanded the criteria to which cities fell into the top 15 for all three models, and we saw that Kansas City was another city in the top 10. So we first looked at whether this got checked. So why did these two cities rise to the top? So one of the things we found was that of the 12 quantitative variables that were selected in all three models, both cities had better than average characteristics on 58% of those variables. So from a modeling standpoint, that got checked in terms of, okay, of all of these variables that were selected as significant, both of these cities rose to the top of both of those. So from a modeling standpoint, that makes sense. But we also wanted to intuitively gut check to make sure that these cities made sense from just like a city research perspective. So we looked at a list that this company called Fandom releases, where they rank the 250 best fan bases in the world, from sports to entertainment. And we found that Kansas City and Seattle do have some of the most avid fan bases out there in the United States. And as Christy mentioned, we did find that in terms of the revenue and attendance models, the number of other professional teams and the number of NFL teams are very important and significant in terms of driving attendance and revenue for an NHL team. So in terms of looking at their actual fan bases, the Seattle Seahawks, Seattle's NFL team, had the seventh most avid fan base in the NFL as of last year. The Kansas City Chiefs, their Kansas City's NFL team, have the fourth most avid fan base in the NFL. And the Kansas City Royals, the Kansas City's Major League Baseball team, have the ninth most avid fan base. So in terms of just making sure that we had an ironclad recommendation for the NHL, this all kind of gut checked for us in terms of, okay, number one, these modeling results make sense. And number two, this makes sense in terms of just assessing what these fan bases look like today. So then moving on to the relocation question, we used a very similar approach in terms of analyzing the results, in that we wanted to see which city or cities rose to the bottom for all three models. In addition, we realized we have, in the form of social media engagements, a way of being able to gauge actual like fan engagement with these cities and with these cities in terms of their like engagement with their teams. So we added in that layer of looking at social media engagements over the past 3 months for these cities or the teams within these cities. And in doing so, we found that Phoenix, Denver, and Raleigh were at the bottom of all three models and at the bottom in terms of social media engagements. Phoenix in particular has the lowest fan engagement of all three cities, and it's predicted to generate the lowest revenue. So as the NHL is trying to maximize revenue and figure out the cities that are going to be the most lucrative in terms of the overall standing in the league, we highlighted or isolated Phoenix as one of those kind of problem cities that are apt for relocation. And then looking into, again, like similar to expansion, we wanted to make sure that number one, these results made sense from a modeling standpoint, but we also wanted to make sure that this made sense in the real world setting. So looking into the actual history or actual news surrounding Phoenix, the team has long been plagued by issues. They filed for bankruptcy in 2009. They've undergone numerous ownership changes. They've had a number of issues with arena location, and they're actually right now looking at where they should move their city to within Phoenix. So moving on to the next slide, here's where we kind of brought all of this together. So with Arizona looking for a new stadium already within Arizona, what our proposal is to move the Arizona Coyotes to Seattle, which has already been partially approved as the next city. They've already sold thousands of season tickets. So we propose moving the Arizona Coyotes to Seattle. And what this does is we really wanted to make sure that our recommendation was viable within the current framework of the league. So we looked at the conferences and the divisions, and we wanted to make sure that we were aligning things well for the league. So by moving the Arizona Coyotes to Seattle, that's just changing a team within the Pacific Division, and it makes sense to have Seattle be in the Pacific Division, considering the rest of the teams on the West Coast within that division. So then we looked and saw that there is another opening in the Central Division, and we really wanted to even out the divisions so that we created a better playoff picture, so that we created more balance. And so in doing so, in looking at which city best suits that Central Division slot, that's where we thought that Kansas City would be a great fit there. So that is our recommendation from just looking at the conference, looking at the conference alignments, looking at the modeling results, and getting an understanding of really the current like atmosphere of fan engagement and the team standings within their cities. So now to really bring this to life, I'm going to pivot this over to Scott, who's going to talk through the visualizations that we built to accompany this analysis and recommendation, and talk through our mobile app.
Okay. Hold on just a second. I will pull up our Tableau visualizations. So some of this is kind of, this is more the dashboard, so it includes a lot of information that we've kind of already touched on. So we initially just have a visualization that looks at the expansion over the years. So you can see that the last major expansion was 2000, prior to us heading in Vegas in 2016. So we're kind of ripe for expansion. We really haven't had a period this long without an expansion since many years ago, back in 1942 through 66. So as we move on to the next one, oops, sorry, hopefully, there we go. So what we have here, this is a map of our divisions. What's kind of nice about it is you can also kind of select whichever, if you want to just focus on the Atlantic Division, Central Division, so on, and relocate. That's the Phoenix team, because we wouldn't really have them in a division anymore. What this also provides is just some data on each metropolitan area. So if you want to hover over a particular city, you can see that it's been in the NHL for 47 years. Projected attendance is 17,000. Here's Seattle, no years in the NHL, so it's NA right now. But so we include some of our relevant information there. Moving on to the next visualization. This just once again is a visualization of the projected attendance. So we've got Phoenix, which is once again towards the bottom, but then we also have Kansas City and Seattle, which are the two new teams here. One thing I forgot to mention in the EDA portion is that in our initial modeling and everything, we actually removed three outliers of Chicago, New York, and LA because those three cities are very different. So as you look at this projected attendance, it looks like Kansas City and Seattle are kind of towards the bottom, but keep in mind that we're kind of operating at the margins in terms of looking at expansion. There aren't any other cities like Chicago, New York, LA. And if you look at the top 10 cities in population between the U.S. and Canada, Houston's the only one in the top 10 without an NHL team. So that's just wanted to point that out, as these look kind of low, but they're actually still above Denver, Phoenix, Raleigh, and so on. We go on. This is our probability of an NHL team times expected revenue. Once again, Kansas City, Seattle, they're kind of above where some of the other teams that currently exist. So just another visualization of that. And then just to kind of prove our point about where Phoenix sits, it's second to last in social media interactions. It's second to last in projected attendance. It really is. And then as Katie mentioned, with all the problems with the ownership team, it really is kind of the most ripe one for moving to a new area. So in addition to that, that's our Tableau visualizations. We also created a mobile app. So kind of the background for this, we kind of figured that, if an NHL executive is kind of on the go and they need to have information at the touch of their fingertips, we created this app. So just kind of going through it, we have our initial logo and everything, the Hypatia Consulting Group. Sorry. You click here. Got the quick links. This actually includes a link to the visualizations dashboard, which you just saw. I won't go into that again. I also included a dashboard of your data transformations. If you're with somebody more technical that wants to see what we actually did, that's there also. Not that we necessarily want to run through that at the moment, but that's all there.
Now here, this is Don hopping in with a quick question. Now, is this something that I could conceivably download onto my cell phone right now, or or is this something that I would access via like a Google web browser via my cell phone? How would I look at this if I?
Yeah, you can actually download it. I've actually got it downloaded on my phone too. It's an actual app. It's through I used App Maker to create it. I'm actually just using the HTML version because it's easier for presenting purposes. But I know we have a link. I'd have to.
Okay.
Sorry.
Do I go to Google Stores, or how would I get that on?
It's not actually in the Google Store. Actually, it's in the. Actually, have to go to the App Maker. I've actually got the link. You go to the App Maker site, and then you download it as an app. So it's not actually in the Google or Apple stores. But it is still a downloadable app that you can, it works just like any other app. It's just not in the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. Although certainly.
Yeah, I was going to say I have a collection of student apps on my cell phone. It's a little trophy case that I have when they do a good presentation.
Yeah, no, I can. I think we actually have the link in our full paper where you can actually download the app itself. Honestly, the main reason I didn't push it out to Google or Apple is because they charged extra for that. So I guess I was just being.
I don't expect you guys to spend money on that. It's just a nice to have. No pressure, guys.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Yeah, but it is still downloadable from the App Maker website as an actual app. So yeah, in addition to the dashboard visualization, we also have the exec summary, which is just kind of includes some links to like the exec summary that I think you've already seen. Links to our Google Drive document, so that you can always have that information at hand if you need it. Same with just the 5 PowerPoint slides. I didn't include the full presentation, but these are those 5 PowerPoint slides that kind of do a quick overview. And then the rest is just kind of things that I thought might be useful for an NHL executive to have. We've got their, a quick link to their NHL YouTube channel. Sorry, I don't actually want to play that at the moment. Right now, it's going to show NHL players sharing their favorite childhood memories. So we thought that would be kind of nice to have. And then I also included a link to the Google Trends NHL version of the Google Trends, so they can kind of track, if they need to, how popular it is over time. You can adjust the time in Google Trends. You can also see where it's popular, and then you can also see related topics and queries to the NHL in general, which we just thought that would be kind of a nice to have for any NHL executive, just to kind of have in the app. And that kind of covers what we have in the app and the visualizations. And I think that basically concludes our presentation. I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add, but I think at this point we're probably open to any questions.
I'll wait for does anybody else have anything they'd like to add?
Not for me.
Okay, I'm hearing silence, so that means I think you guys are done. I don't have any questions because you guys have pretty much answered most of my questions throughout the quarter, but I can give you guys feedback if you're ready for that.
Sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just starting off, I want to say this is probably, I've taught this class maybe 3 or 4 years, and this is probably one of the most complete projects I've ever seen. I mean, just outstanding. You guys got everything in here. You solved a very real problem. The analytics was complete. You hit all of the high points of what you should do in analytics. And then you also didn't fall into the trap of a lot of students get enamored with the analytics. You guys understand that the analytics was to solve a problem, and you solved it, gave very practical assessments. Your slide deck here was crisp. It was not overly busy. Love your recommendations. Love the app was great, and then the dashboard was excellent. And I know that probably I twist arms to get students to also give me a cell phone app, and I understand that it's probably a contrived things that you put into it. You're like, well, what do we put into this thing? Even with that, it was still. You didn't just do an app to check a box. You actually did an app that would probably be useful to an executive. So, just across the board, great stuff. So, we'll go through your slide deck in a minute, but I just want to give you the overview. It was just outstanding. This was a great project, great presentation. And heck, you didn't even bore me. I was actually interested in sometimes students start talking about stuff that is a little dry, but this was actually very interesting, and you guys all spoke very well, and you sort of made sure that you kept it lively and interesting. So I guess the only complaint I have was you said that Raleigh was the only NHL team that didn't have another professional team, and I'm wondering, what about Columbus Blue Jackets? Anybody want to address that?
I think Ohio State counts as a quasi-professional team in the hearts of Columbus residents.
Okay, fair enough. Good comeback here. Okay, so let's throw your slide deck to the very beginning real fast, and we'll just go through it real quick, and then So again, nice slides. A lot of times, then the slides disappear. There we go. So great slides, visually appealing, and throughout the whole thing, not too busy. This is a lot of times students just pack a bunch of stuff in here, and it gets overly. I'm like, what am I looking at? This is the perfect blend of simple and but still informative. So let's just scroll down real quick. Next slide. I like the sometimes students give a quick overview of who's who on the team. Sometimes they don't. I'm ambivalent about it either way. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But you guys did it, and that's good because you got in, got out, got home. It wasn't overly just enough that if I was an actual CEO, I'd look at this and go, okay, now I know who the players were. Great. And you only spend a couple of minutes on it, so that's good. If you do this in your careers, that's the way you want to do it. Keep it fast. So let's move on. Let's see a little bit further. Let me see. I've got some notes that I have. Let's see. Let's go a little further on down. Oh, I like, okay, 1 second. Let's go back real fast. One more, the previous slide. I like how you expanded on not just where you should put the next expansion team, like is Seattle the correct one? I like that you also expanded it to the mindset of the should we relocate a current team? In other words, it wasn't just where's the next one. You also thought outside the box a little bit, and you said, well, should we move on around? That's the kind of thing consultants should do. Because in my brain, when you guys originally proposed this project to me, it was like, oh, where's the next one, and that's it. But, you know, that's what you want to do. You want to say to the boss, hey, listen, maybe not only do we put one here, but we take one away over there and move it. So that's kind of a look at the big picture and expand the scope of what you're trying to do. And that's what you guys did, and I really like that. The next slide, I want to give you a quick comment on this. I like this video a lot, and I found it interesting, and I'll probably want to go watch it later because I think it's interesting. However, this is just something to think about. This probably be a great video if it was in a conference room and I was the CEO and you're doing this live. Doing it over the internet probably doesn't work just because of the technical issues. But I still like it because I think it's cool. I'm just saying, keep in mind, think in terms. Oh, I'm getting a testing 1, 2, 3. So somebody might want to mute. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I like it because I thought it was cool, but keep in mind when you're in your careers, when you're doing this kind of stuff, think in terms of, you know, not just who your audience is, but how are they watching your presentation. Oh, I'm still getting that echo. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, there we go. You know, keep that in mind. Also, you had the issue with the sound, how it wasn't playing. That's something else to keep in mind as well. I always tell people that back in my days when I was with SAS and used to do customer demos, I used to say being doing presentations, it's like being the fighter pilot. You know, the fighter pilot is, you know, hours of boredom and moments of terror. Well, doing demos, it's just the opposite. It's hours of terror and moments of boredom. So always remember that this event it never works the way it's supposed to, but you guys had handled it very well. You know, you started giving me voiceover when you realized that there was no sound. So it's good to be able to think on your feet like that, and you guys did a nice job. So let's move on a little bit. Okay. I like the variables that you used. Let me see, I had some notes here. I liked that you used the same criteria that the Major League Baseball and NFL did. I thought that was a very smart thing to do. And again, that's a great thing to do, is to be able to draw from other industries or other places. You don't have to come up with something unique and novel. If somebody else has got it and it's working, you know what? You use it. And so that's what you did, and that's what the boss is paying you to do. Something else, let's see, let's move on over to the variables where you had the imputation. So let's see, I found all this, that previous slide there. Again, we won't go into it, but I really liked all of the analysis that you used here. You know, with the population and the Fortune 500. I mean, just all of this stuff is practical, and you usually know. Let me give you a hint in life when it comes to analytics. It's when you can do the analysis and you look at what the variables you put in and what comes out. If you go, duh, I knew that, you know what? You know that you're on the right track. And that's what you did. Everything here made perfect sense. There was nothing in here that was jumping out at me as red flags. So just practical stuff like this, practical common sense application of analytics, that's what you want, that's what you did. Great. Let's move a little bit. Let's see, next slide. Just want to say, tip of the hat, I don't know where you guys learned to do decision tree data imputation, but I love that you do that. You know, some of you probably were in my 411 class, and you know I twist your arms to use that technique. I love it. One thing I would have probably have done with that is you might have wanted to add a slide and actually show a small decision tree as opposed to saying, oh, Canadian people, it's this percentage and this and this and this. A very quick decision tree might have been very powerful. You know, my imagination isn't as good as it used to be because I'm 52. So just a thought there. This is a suggestion. Let's see. Move on a little bit here. I like this too. It wasn't just a simple should it be here. When you opened it up to how much money is it going to make and attendance, it becomes very practical. I like that you used a multiple criteria to decide where to put that city, the next expansion city. That's really, again, such a practical use of analytics. I really like that. Let me see. Go to the next slide here. Oh, this is another one too. Probably, now I'm not criticizing, but I'm just saying probably this is even overkill to have this many models to try to do it. Had you told me, Don, we tried a tree and a regression, I would have been okay with that just because in my mind there's no way a CEO is ever going to move a Phoenix over to Kansas City based on a neural network that they can't understand. So obviously you're going to need some kind of a regression or tree that can be explained. However, this is a great habit to get into, is try models from all of the various families, support vector machines, gradient boosting, random forest. That's a great habit to get into. The reason why is there's going to be some idiot in that conference room who's going to totally derail your talk when he's like, well, why didn't you do a support vector machine? Everybody knows they're the best and blah, blah, blah. And that guy's going to be all over you, and he's going to totally derail your talk. So the fact that you did all of this stuff, that guy's not going to be able to derail because he's got to show everybody how smart he is. So he's never going to be able to even open his mouth because of this. So this is a great habit to get into. And ultimately, you guys went with regressions, and that's where you want to be. When in doubt, always go to something explainable and understandable. So I really like that. But I also like that you threw everything at this because, again, it's complete, and it's also you got to be a little paranoid when you're doing these presentations. There's going to be somebody in that room. Think about that guy. Move a little bit later here. Let's see. I had one thought about this. Going forward, you said population growth had a negative coefficient. I liked that you figured out why you think it has a negative coefficient. In other words, the population grows, attendance goes down. I like that you track that down. One thing is you might want to consider in the future if you ever get a variable like this that's counterintuitive, and it could be because of multicollinearity, it could be for whatever reason. If it's in there, you might want to take it out of the model. I mean, that's something I tend to do. I'm not going to second guess or backseat drive. You guys did the analysis, not me. So I still got a echo. So put yourself on me here. I'll see if I can do it. 1 minute. I think that Susan was my testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, great. So I got that's just a suggestion is you may want to consider taking variables out if they make counterintuitive sense. But again, I'm not second guessing you, just giving you a suggestion. Let's move on a little bit more. Let's see. I suppose we could just move on to we don't even have to look at the other stuff. I just like your, let's move to the very end with your recommendations. So I like this too. You not only gave me where the next one ought to be. You're like saying, "Hey, boss, Seattle, you chose Seattle, and it's actually a good choice." So that's making me really happy, okay? But then you're also saying, look, move it over into the Pacific Division, and we're going to move Phoenix on into Kansas City. And incidentally, I spend a lot of time in Kansas City because I'm working with Sprint right now, and I can tell you that those fans are fanatical about the Chiefs and the Royals. So I can see that Kansas City would probably be a great spot. And of course, my hometown of Cleveland, where I'm sitting right now, they probably are not going to be happy that you guys didn't select them because they love sports teams here, but probably Kansas City is a good choice. So that makes intuitive sense, but I like that you not only just said here, you also showed me how to redo the Eastern and Western conferences so that it's going to make the most sense. So this is the kind of thing you want to do. And then just going to the very end where you said, where you showed your dashboard and your mobile app, again, I know that probably those weren't necessary for this type of project, but you guys went ahead and did them anyway because it's great practice to do. And you didn't just phone it in and threw something up on a screen and walk away. You guys really put some thought into what you had to do. And, I really am appreciative of the effort that went into that. And same thing with the cell phone app. I mean, again, you guys didn't have to probably do that for this project, but I, really wanted students to do that, and you guys did. And you didn't just do it; you went the extra mile to do it well. So, overall, just outstanding work, and I think that you guys should be very proud of this. Do you guys have any final questions or comments for me at all?
I do actually have this one.
Really appreciate the feedback. Go ahead, Scott.
No, go ahead, Ray.
Here, I'm going to stop.
Let me
stop recording right now, and then you guys can ask your questions.